By 4:30 every morning, my coffee maker clicked on before I was fully awake. That had been true in a state-issued ranger cabin, a rented duplex over a hardware store, and now in a weathered farmhouse with peeling white paint and a mailbox that leaned like it had given up arguing with Michigan winners. 12 years as a park ranger had taught me two things. Most emergencies start small, and routine is a kind of armor. So I kept mine. Boots by the back door, laces loose and ready. Duty belt hung on the same chair every night. Scanner volume low enough not to wake the dead, high enough to catch my call sign if dispatch needed me. Trail maps folded in clear sleeves. Phone charging beside a yellow legal pad where I still wrote things by hand, because batteries die and signal drops, and paper doesn't care about weather. The farmhouse sat outside Grayling where county roads narrowed, then forgot they were roads and turned into two-track lanes with grass growing between tire ruts. My property line backed right into state forest land. Good for response times, I told myself. If a hiker broke an ankle, if a black bear got into a campground dumpster, if somebody decided to test their luck with a bonfire in August, I could be on scene in minutes. The house had a broad porch, a sagging barn that listed left, and a split cedar fence enclosing a backyard that opened toward birch and jack pine. You could stand at my kitchen window and see a mile of trees if you knew how to look through layers. First the overgrown grass, then the brush line, then trunks silver in the right light. At dawn, mist lay low over the ditch like breath. At night, it was black enough out there to make your own reflection in the glass look like a stranger. I wasn't entirely alone. Finch, my old Labrador rescue, had claimed the porch the first day. He was gray at the muzzle and stiff in one hip, but he still did his perimeter checks every evening like a little black-furred deputy. Finch had seen coyotes, porcupines, loose hunting dogs, and one very rude raccoon in my years with him. He had opinions about all of them and expressed those opinions loudly. My people were close enough too. My younger sister Mara texted me pictures of her sourdough disasters and sent me links to cheap motion lights every time she remembered I lived out in werewolf country, as she put it. She said it joking, always followed by a heart emoji, and don't forget to eat real food. At the district office, I worked mostly with people who had dirt in the seams of their hands and sunburn under their collar lines. Nate handled search and rescue logistics and complained like it was a competitive sport. Jules ran enforcement and had a laugh that carried down the hallway. We swapped bad coffee and worse stories, signed out equipment, checked camera traps, argued over weather models and trail closures, and did the unglamorous work that keeps tourists alive. My ex-wife Holly and I had settled into a practical truce after the divorce. No fireworks, no screaming matches, just schedules and careful politeness that had, over time, grown into something like respect. Our son Eli called on weekends and asked whether I'd seen any wolves lately. He was 10 and believed I had secret knowledge of every animal in the Lower Peninsula. I didn't correct him much. The day I got the farmhouse keys, I ran my routine even with half my life in cardboard boxes. Morning patrol along the Mason-tracked access roads. Replaced 2 camera trap batteries near a game trail crossing. Wrote up a report on a downed poplar blocking a side spur. Noon call about a stranded kayaker that turned out to be a college kid who had lost track of distance. Back at the office, I filled forms until my wrist cramped. then drove home on 72 with the windows down and pine pitch in the air. It was the first evening the house felt like mine. I'd mounted my cast iron skillet in the kitchen, stacked field guides on a shelf, and set Eli's framed school photo on the mantel where the sunlight hit it around 6. Finch lay on the porch boards, nose on paws, content in that old dog way that says as long as you're here, this is home. Dusk in northern Michigan usually arrives with noise. Frogs start up in ditches. Tree crickets thread a steady electrical hum through the dark. Wind rubs needles together in the pines. Once in a while, a coyote yips far off and gets answered. You don't notice that chorus until it stops. That evening it stopped all at once. I was at the sink, rinsing a plate, when the sound outside cut out, like someone had thrown a switch. No taper, no gradual thinning, just gone. The silence hit hard enough that I turned off the faucet and stood there, dish soap on my hands, listening. Nothing. No frogs, no insects, no rustle of small things in brush. Finch lifted his head from the porch and stared toward the back fence. "Hey," I said, "what is it?" His ears flattened. He stood, not in the loose, curious way he did when deer wandered by, but rigid, tail low. I opened the back door to let him out, and he stepped forward exactly 2 paces, then froze, nails clicking on the threshold. His shoulders trembled. Finch had charged a black bear cub once because he thought it might touch my truck tire. He was fearless to the point of stupidity. Seeing him press against my leg and refuse to cross his own yard sent a small cold line down my spine. I knelt and checked him out of habit. No burrs in paws. No obvious injury. Heart hammering, though. I could feel it through his chest. Probably a coyote close, I told him and myself. Maybe a fisher. He didn't look at me. He stared at the tree line, jaw tight, and made a sound I'd heard only during thunderstorms. A thin whine he seemed embarrassed to let out. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The beam cut across the grass, over fence rails, into the first rank of birch trunks. Nothing moved. I scanned left to right, then higher, checking low branches for owl silhouettes, listening for wing beats, any explanation that fit inside the world I understood. Still nothing. Silence so complete, I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Rational thought is a muscle. Mine had reps. Sudden quiet could mean a raptor had dropped into the area, could mean a predator cat, though rare here. Could mean weather pressure changing before a front. Could mean absolutely nothing, except I was keyed up from moving and hearing my own imagination for the first time without city noise under it. I shut the door, locked it, and told Finch he was sleeping inside tonight. He didn't argue. He followed me, room to room, while I unpacked the last kitchen box and tried to ignore how often I glanced at the dark windows. At 9:12 p.m., Mara called. "How's Wilderness Palace?" she asked. "Leaning barn, mystery draft, one smoke detector that chirps for attention, so pretty good." "Did you eat?" "Turkey sandwich." "That's not a meal. That's a cry for help." I smiled despite myself and looked over at Finch curled by the mudroom door, chin up, eyes fixed toward the backyard. "He's acting weird tonight." "Finch?" "Yeah, won't go out back." A beat of silence, then she softened. "Could be all the new smells. New place, new territory." "Yep. You sound tired. Long week. You want me to come up Saturday? I can bring chili, real chili, not your Ranger survival chili." "I'll survive till Saturday." "Promise?" "Promise." After we hung up, I did a slow walk through of the house and checked locks for no reason I could admit out loud. Deadbolt set, mudroom latch secure, porch motion light functioning. I turned the scanner up one notch, then back down. Eventually, I killed the kitchen light and took a chair by the rear window with a notebook, pretending I was just logging first night observations, like any land manager would. 10:03 p.m. No wildlife vocalizations behind property. 10:17 p.m. Dog unwilling to enter backyard. 10:45 p.m. Light breeze from north. Temp dropping. I almost laughed writing it. It read like a rookie report trying too hard to sound official. By 11:30, I told myself to stop being ridiculous and go to bed. I let Finch into my room. He paced once, twice, then settled on the rug but kept his head up, listening. I didn't sleep much. New houses have unfamiliar noises, radiators ticking, boards adjusting, old pipes knocking like distant footsteps. Around midnight, the wind died completely. The quiet pressed in again, heavier than before. At 12:41 a.m., I heard it. Crunch, a pause, crunch, crunch, wet leaves, compressed under weight. Not quick and random like raccoon scuffle. Not the skitter hop of deer. Deliberate steps, measured and heavy, moving along the outside of my fence from east to west. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my flashlight and phone, and stood still to triangulate. The sound stopped, then resumed, closer to the back corner post. Finch rose without a bark. Every hair along his spine stood up. He looked at me like he wanted instructions and had already decided he wouldn't follow me out there. "Stay," I whispered, though my mouth was dry. I moved to the mudroom window and eased the curtain aside with 2 fingers. The yard was a flat wash of moonlight and shadow. Grass silvered, fence dark, birch trunks pale as bones. No movement. Then, another step, this time from just beyond the fence line. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the rails. Empty. The beam died against trees 20 yards back, swallowed by brush. I listened so hard my temples throbbed. Nothing for a full minute. I opened the mudroom door anyway, because training beats fear until fear gives you proof. Cool air hit my face carrying wet earth, old leaves, and a faint rank musk that didn't fit fox or coyote or bear to me. I stepped onto the top stair. Finch stayed inside, whining low. "Hey," I called into the dark, "go on." My voice sounded too loud and too human for that silence. No answering rustle. No retreat crash through brush. I went down one step, then another, beam steady. The backyard soil was still soft from rain 2 days earlier. I could check tracks at first light if I needed to. Maybe this was a loose dog from a neighboring property. Maybe somebody's half-wild Malamute mix had figured out fence lines. Maybe I was out here in my socks talking to trees like a lunatic. I stood there long enough for the chill to creep through my shirt. Then from the far end of the yard, right near where the fence met the tree line, something exhaled. Not a snort, not a bark, a deep, chesty chuff dragged through teeth. Every instinct I had, trained and otherwise, told me I was being watched. I backed up to the porch and shut the mudroom door without turning around. Locked it, then locked the deadbolt above it too. Finch pressed so close to my knee he nearly knocked me over. I waited at the window with the light off, letting my eyes adjust. Minutes stretched. My heartbeat slowed enough to hear the house settle again. At 1:17 a.m., 2 amber reflections appeared at the far end of my yard. They weren't low to the ground, like a fox's eyeshine. They floated level with the top rail of my split-cedar fence, too high and too steady. They blinked once, slowly, then shifted sideways in a smooth glide that had no four-legged bob to it at all. Finch made a strangled sound and backed away from the window. Outside, the eyes held on my house, unblinking now, as if it knew exactly where I stood behind the glass. The eyes held on my house, unblinking now, as if it knew exactly where I stood behind the glass. I didn't move for a full count of 10. Then training kicked in, where panic wanted to live. I eased backward without breaking line of sight, reached for the legal pad on the counter, and wrote with a hand that shook harder than I liked. 1:17 a.m. 2 amber reflections at rear fence line, approximately top rail height, fixed on structure. Finch was behind me near the hallway, nails scraping wood as he backed up another step. I grabbed the flashlight, killed the mudroom light so I wouldn't blind myself, and clicked the beam on low through the window first. The reflections vanished instantly. Not moved, vanished like someone pinched out 2 coals. I switched to high and swept slow, left to right. Fence, birch trunks, brush. Nothing. No retreat sound, no crash through undergrowth, no coyote yip. I cracked the mudroom door an inch and listened. Silence, thick and total. The air that slid through the gap smelled like wet earth and something sour musky underneath it. Not rot exactly. Not skunk. Not the oily, sweet smell of bear. Closer to wet dog left too long in a closed truck bed, but sharper. Predatory. I shut the door again and locked it. Okay, I said out loud. To Finch, to myself, to the stupid dark. Could be a person with a light. Could be an animal catching reflection. Could be angle. Finch didn't buy any of that. He was pressed flat against the baseboard, eyes wide enough to show white. I went room by room and checked every curtain gap. No eyes on the side yard. No movement near the barn. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the tree line until my calves cramped. Once, around 1:31, I thought I heard a weight shift in leaves beyond the far post. Could have been a branch settling, could have been anything. By 2:10, nothing else showed itself. The chorus never came back. No frogs, no insects, no night birds. Just dead quiet and the occasional click of old pipes inside the house. I did not sleep. At first light, I put on boots, clipped my radio on, and stepped into the backyard, with Finch glued to my left knee like he was relearning heel work. The sky was the pale iron color Michigan does before sunrise. Dew silvered the grass. In daylight, everything looked ordinary enough to make me angry at myself. I started at the back steps and worked a grid, same method we use around campsites after nuisance bear calls. Eyes down. Slow passes. Flag anything inconsistent. There were deer tracks near the side fence, old. Rabbit prints under the lilacs, likely from the evening before. At the far end near the tree line, the mud held deeper impressions, elongated, kenned at a glance, but bigger than any coyote I'd measured in county reports. Maybe wolf-sized if you were generous. Then 2 feet over, where the soil thinned into gravel. The pattern smeared into dragged crescents and odd heel-like pressure marks that didn't resolve cleanly into paws. I crouched, measured with a folding ruler, photographed from multiple angles with my phone, and marked location pins in my field app. Could be distortion from thaw-freeze cycles, I told myself. Could be overlap of multiple animals. Could be a domestic dog track blown out in wet soil. Could be my own confirmation bias because I'd spooked myself after midnight. At the fence, I found cedar fibers peeled back from one post at shoulder height. Not fresh break, but fresh scrape. I ran my finger over it and got a resin tack on my skin. Something had put force there, pulling down or bracing. Bear? Maybe. Bears climb and test structures. But bears leave a different story behind. Claw ladders and trunks, scat, obvious mass displacement. I found none of that. By 6:20, I had 37 photos, 6 measurements, and no clean answer. I fed Finch, showered, changed into office uniform, and drove to district on M72 with the windows cracked, even though it was chilly. I needed moving air. Nate was at the coffee station when I walked in, staring at a logistics spreadsheet like it had insulted his mother. "You look like warmed-over roadkill," he said. "Thanks." "New house jitters?" "Maybe." I set my mug down. "You ever see canid tracks that look right in mud and wrong on gravel? Like transition weird?" He shrugged. "All the time after rain. Substrate lies. Why?" "Had something circle my fence line last night." He grinned. "Congrats. You're officially rural." "Big enough to put eye shine at top rail?" "Top rail if you're downhill. Could be deer catching light." "Not the way it moved." Nate blew on his coffee. "You've slept, 2 hours? Don't make a cryptid out of bad depth perception." He meant it kindly. It still landed like sandpaper. At 8:40, I carried my photos into my supervisor's office. She looked through half of them, zoomed one print, and leaned back. "Could be a feral shepherd mix," she said. "Could be a young bear. Could be somebody messing around because they know a ranger just moved in. Somebody in my backyard at 1 a.m. in total silence." She gave me the look managers give when they need you functional by noon. "You just moved? You're overtired? And this property's new to you. Log the incident as unusual wildlife activity. Set cams. Don't chase shadows." "Already logging." "Good. And get sleep." Later at Motor Pool, I caught Deputy Len Hart from County, old acquaintance from search recoveries, guy with a mustache that deserved its own zip code. I kept it neutral. "Len, you heard any calls about large dogs around Grayling outskirts?" He snorted. "Every fall. Missing chickens, missing cat food, missing sobriety." He tightened a strap in his trunk and added, "People around there blame half their problems on Dogman stories after too many beers." I gave a short laugh because that was easier than explaining why my palms had started sweating. "Yeah, figured. Lock your trash. Motion lights?" "You'll be fine." "Fine. Right." By noon, I'd signed out 2 extra trail cams, fresh cards, and lithium batteries. Spent the afternoon mounting one on a birch at the back corner, one on a service road, cut through state land behind my property, angled to catch movement from east to west. I checked my porch fixtures and rewired the back floodlight switch so I could cycle power fast from the mudroom breaker panel if I needed to force a reset. It was a small trick, but strobing can spook animals long enough to buy distance. At 4:05, Mara texted, "How's farm life? Did you eat vegetables today or just ranger jerky?" I typed, erased, then sent, "Saw something weird last night. Probably big dog. Installing lights." She called immediately. "Define weird." "Finch wouldn't go outside, something pacing fence line. Eye shine too high." "Too high like?" "Too high?" She was quiet for 2 beats. "You want me there tonight?" "No, I'm fine." That wasn't convincing. "I'm just being cautious." "Same thing you said before that ice rescue when your radio died." I rubbed my forehead. "I'll check in, okay?" "Do that and lock everything." "I know you think you're immortal because you own a first aid kit." "Not immortal, just stubborn." "Close enough." Before dusk, I called Holly for our usual midweek scheduled check about Eli. She mentioned a science project. I said I'd help him over video Saturday morning if he wanted. From the background, I heard Eli yell, "Ask Dad if wolves can climb fences." I answered loud enough for him to hear, "Most don't need to." He laughed like it was a joke. And maybe it was. In every world except mine. By 9 p.m., the house was sealed up and lit. Scanner on low. Sidearm in the mudroom lockbox. Key on my belt. Notebook open. 9:12 p.m. Audible insects present. Moderate. 10:03 p.m. Vocalizations thinning. 10:28 p.m. Finch alert at rear hall. 10:45 p.m. Breeze north to south. Temperature drop. At 11:07, the woods shut off again. No taper. Switch flip silence, same as the night before. Finch stood from a dead sleep and stared at the back door. He didn't bark once. I had never seen him this quiet. I took position at the rear window with the interior lights off, flashlight in my left hand, phone camera ready in my right. I told myself this was evidence gathering, not fear. Procedure, not obsession. Midnight went by with nothing but my own breathing and Finch's shallow panting. At 12:41 a.m., the pacing started. Crunch. Pause. Crunch, crunch. East to west along the outside fence. Heavy enough to compress wet leaf litter in distinct beats. Deliberate enough to sound almost counted. I mouthed the cadence unconsciously. 1, 2, 3. Waiting for randomness that never came. It moved like it knew my boundary and was testing it. I didn't open the door this time. I stood at the window and waited. At 1:17 a.m., the two amber reflections appeared again at the far end of the yard. Same height, same spacing. Level with the top rail. My skin went cold so fast it felt chemical. I raised the flashlight and gave one quick burst. The eyes blinked, slow and almost irritated. Not startled, not panicked. Then they shifted 3 feet sideways in a smooth line without the head bob of a four-legged gait. I whispered before I realized I was speaking. No. Could be a person with retro-reflective gear, I thought. Could be prank goggles. Could be 2 separate points catching angle. Then the points tracked me as I moved a half step left, maintaining lock through the glass. That wasn't random light. That was gaze. Finch made a low, torn whine and backed down the hallway until his hindquarters hit the bathroom door. He wouldn't come forward even when I called him. I forced myself to document. Phone up. Zoom maxed. The image pixelated into grain and darkness. On screen, the eyes looked like cheap LED dots. In real life, they had depth, like lanterns set deep in sockets. I kept trying to force a known category over it. Bear standing against fence. No shoulder hump visible. Deer? Wrong color, wrong spacing, wrong behavior. Dog on raised ground. There was no rise there. I'd walked it that morning. Human with flashlight. No spill, no hand movement, no voice, no boot scuff. The eyes blinked once more, slow, deliberate. Then they lowered by maybe 6 inches and rose again, as if whatever carried them had flexed at the knees. My stomach dropped. That movement was not quadruped posture adjustment. It looked like a crouch and reset. I took a step back from the glass. The eyes held their position. I took another. Still fixed on me. We stayed like that for I don't know how long. Maybe 40 seconds, maybe 4 minutes. Me counting breaths. It watching the house like it was reading floor plans. A cloud bank slid over the moon and swallowed the yard in darker gray. For a moment, the reflections dimmed to embers. Then the cloud moved on, and the darkness behind the eyes stood up. At first, my brain refused the geometry. The shape separated from the tree line by degrees, edge by edge, shoulders too broad for any coyote, neck thick, head forward, mass stacked vertically where no ordinary conid should be. It was partly turned, one side silvered by moonlight, the other side sunk black. When it elongated fully just for a breath, it topped the fence line by a lot. 7 feet, maybe more if I trusted scale against the birch trunks. I didn't trust anything, least of all my own eyes. "It's a bear," I said, and heard the lie in my voice. Bears don't hold that posture that long. Bears sway. Bears use forelimbs differently. This shape had a stillness to it that felt intentional, balanced, like it knew exactly how much of itself to show. Then it dropped into a hunched stance, not all the way to 4 legs, more like a person half crouching to keep center of gravity under them. Head angled, watching. Moonlight caught the upper line of it and disappeared into matted darkness across the torso. I still couldn't make out details, only proportions, and the proportions were wrong in every direction. Too much shoulder, too narrow through the waist, hindquarters set high, forelimbs long. The outline kept threatening to become familiar, and then slipping out of category again. My chest tightened so hard I had to force air in. I eased the window open a crack, just enough to hear better, immediately hating myself for doing it. Cold air poured in. From the yard came a sound I'd only heard once before, closer now. A deep, chest-driven chuff dragged through teeth. Not a canine bark, not a bear huff. Something in between and neither. Finch barked once from the hallway, sharp, panicked, and then went silent again. The shape turned its head toward that bark with a precise, quick motion. Predatory attention. Not startled curiosity. I closed the window. My flashlight beam shook as I raised it, but I didn't click it on. Some primitive corner of my brain believed that if I lit it up, whatever stood out there would decide to close distance. It shifted weight and the silhouette moved laterally along the fence, smooth and almost quiet for something that massive. A shoulder brushed branches. Twigs trembled after it passed. The top rail creaked under brief pressure where it leaned or braced. I could hear my pulse in my jaw. I thought about calling dispatch. I thought about firing a warning shot. I thought about every single lecture I'd ever given campers about not escalating unknown wildlife encounters. Then it stopped directly across from my mudroom door and went very still again. It felt like waiting. For me to come out. For a light to go on. For a mistake. I stood there gripping the flashlight and lockbox key hard enough to leave crescents in my palm and did not move. Minutes later, maybe 2, maybe 10, the silhouette backed into the trees and dissolved. Not a run, not a panic retreat, just a controlled withdrawal into black timber, until only the faint suggestion of height remained between trunks. Then nothing. No eyes, no sound, no return of frogs. I stayed at the window until dawn grayed the yard enough to prove the fence was still there, and the birch trunks were only birch trunks. Finch never left the hallway. When I finally set the flashlight down, my fingers were cramped into a claw around it. By sunrise, I had 3 new photos too blurry to convince anyone, 1 audio note of my own shaking breathing, and a sentence in my notebook written so hard the pen tore paper. Possible, large, predator, with a typical bipedal posture. Under it, I wrote the only thing that let me keep functioning, likely misidentification in low light. Investigate further. I stared at that line until the words looked flat and foreign. Then I wrote it again, slower, like repetition could make it true. I stared at that line until dawn climbed over the birches and flattened everything into ordinary shapes. Fence, posts, wet grass, no monster, no eyes, just a yard that looked too small to hide anything larger than a deer. Routine kept me moving when belief didn't. I fed Finch in the kitchen because he still wouldn't cross the hall toward the mudroom. I made coffee I didn't taste. I opened the back door with my sidearm holstered, and my notebook in my left hand, like that little rectangle of paper, could make me objective again. The air outside carried that same sour musk. Faint but there. Wet fur, old iron, and something rotten under cedar. I measured from the mudroom step to the fence. Exactly 2 paces to the first marker stake. 13 to the split cedar rail. 20 yards to the birch line where I'd seen the silhouette. The top rail had fresh abrasions where bark fibers had been polished flat, like something had braced its weight there and shifted. Not paw scrapes. Compression. Directional. At the post directly across from my mudroom door, I found 3 narrow gouges set close together, and a 4th offset, lower, deeper, as if a thumb had dug in for leverage. I squatted and stared too long, then forced myself to label and bag. Hair snagged in the cedar splinter. Coarse, dark guard strands. Longer than coyote. Stiffer than dog, with pale underfur clinging near the root. Could be contamination. Could be from an old brush pile. Could be anything. I wrote all of it down. By 6:20, I had 42 photos, 8 measurements, and a plaster cast that looked wrong even before it cured. Front half canine-ish toe spread. Heel smear drawn, long like something had pushed off upright on gravel. I loaded everything into the Ranger truck, drove to District, and laid it on the break room table under fluorescent lights. Nate came in first, coffee mug halfway to his mouth. He looked at the cast, then at me. You sleep at all? Couple minutes. That's not an answer. Supervisor looked over the photos, pinched fingers on one blurry frame where 2 amber points floated at fence height, and gave me the same practical speech, with gentler wording this time. Log it, set more cams, avoid escalation. No solo pursuit after dark if I felt compromised. Jules didn't laugh now, not exactly. She leaned in on the fence gouge photo and said, "That's deliberate pressure. Whatever made that had dexterity." Then she said what everyone says when reality gets expensive. Still probably a big dog or bear doing weird bear things. Len called while I was in the motor pool checking battery packs. "You want to drive by tonight? I can try," he said. "But we're short 2 deputies and I've got court transport till late." "Try," I said. "I'll try." I spent the afternoon turning the farmhouse into a poor man's perimeter system. 2 additional floodlights angled to overlap dead zones. New motion sensors on the barn corner and rear fence line. Fresh cards in both trail cams, plus 1 borrowed unit from storage mounted high in the maple behind the shed. I ran extension to a battery backup in the mudroom and tested the breaker cycle 3 times, on-off and strobe effect if I had to disorient something fast. Finch tracked me at room to room but froze every time I touched the back door handle. When I opened it for a test, he backed up, hackles high along his old spine, and gave a low sound I'd never heard from him. Not a growl, more suppressed whine with teeth behind it. By 9:12 p.m., the yard had gone quiet again at 10:03. No wildlife vocalizations behind property. At 10:45, light breeze from north, temperature dropping. At 11:30, sensors clear. At 12:41 a.m., pacing east to west, just beyond fence. Same cadence as the night before. Deliberate, heavy, At 1:17 a.m., the eyes came up at the far end of the yard like two embers being uncovered. Amber, steady, level with the top rail. I didn't breathe for a full count of 10. Then the barn corner flood kicked from motion and caught it in slices instead of silhouette. First, muzzle. Long, dark, wet at the nose, lower jaw thick and slightly open as it drew scent. Not bear short, not dog proportioned. The snout looked too narrow at the bridge, then flared heavy at the jowls. Second, ear line. Triangular ears pinned back tight against a skull-shaped rong for either wolf or shepherd, set farther apart, making the head look broad and deliberate. Third, forelimb. It reached for the fence post with a movement that made my stomach drop cold. The limb was furred to the wrist, then tapered into a hand-like paw. 5 digits, curved nails. The inner one opposable enough to hook cedar and hold. It curled around the post and flexed. Wood creaked. I heard myself make a sound, low and involuntary, and clamped my teeth shut. The flood cycled. Darkness. Then light again. Ribbed torso under matted fur. Shoulders massively overbuilt. Waist narrower than any bear I'd seen, hindquarters high. Back sloping forward when it hunched. The hind legs bent with a canid angle but drove weight as if built to stand. It shifted and the entire fence rail dipped, then sprang back. The smell hit me through the closed glass this time. Hot, musky rot and wet leaves. It turned its head straight toward the window where I stood. Not toward light, toward me. Its eyes reflected amber at first, then flattened into something darker when the angle changed, and in that second I saw focus there that no panicked scavenger has. Calculation. Selection. A chest-deep chuff rolled across the yard, dragged through teeth, almost conversational in cadence. 1 long push of air, pause, 2 shorter bursts. Finch exploded in 1 bark from the hallway and then scrambled backward, claws ticking on hardwood as he retreated out of sight. I realized my right hand was on the lockbox key again, so hard my knuckles were white. My left thumb had already found the safety strap on the holster, without me deciding to move it. The thing tightened its grip on the post, leaned forward, and for a heartbeat raised higher. Just enough to show the full architecture of it, 7 feet, maybe more if fully extended, before dropping into that half-crouch it favored. Ready posture. Not confusion. Readiness. Every ranger lecture I'd ever given about staying calm with predators became useless noise in my head. This wasn't bluff charge black bear behavior. This wasn't coyote curiosity. This was a boundary test from something that understood boundaries. The flood cut out. Motion timer reset. Yard black. When it came back on 3 seconds later, the post was empty. A second later, I heard it moving laterally outside the beam, smooth and heavy, tracking the fence line toward the mudroom side. No crashing. No panic. Controlled footfalls. Like a person who knew where every board would creak in your house. I backed away from the window 1 step at a time, forcing myself not to run. I locked Finch in the bathroom with his blanket and water, then stood in the dark kitchen with the sidearm in hand, and counted each pass of those footsteps until they faded into timber. They stopped before they were fully gone, as if it wanted me listening. I must have slept eventually because I woke at the table with my cheek on the notebook and daylight in my eyes. The page under my face had a smear of ink and 1 sentence written twice. Not random. Tests response window. Outside, the yard looked untouched until I opened the mudroom door and saw the first thing. My work glove, The right one, with my initials burned inside the cuff, sat upright on top of the fence post where it had gripped the night before. I hadn't left gloves outside. I kept them in a wire basket beside the washer, inside mudroom door shut. I didn't remember moving them. I went to the basket. Left glove still there. Right missing. I stood in that doorway for a long time with cold running down my back and told myself I'd carried it out absent-mindedly during setup. Then I saw Finch's old rope toy hanging from the barn latch, knotted hard, as if cinched by hands. The toy had been in the living room crate. Finch wouldn't go near the barn side now. He stood rigid in the kitchen and stared past me, lips pulled tight. I checked windows. No broken latch. No forced entry. But the rear mudroom threshold had a smear of damp dirt and 3 short scratches at knee height on the inner trim, like nails had tested the weather strip seam. I pulled trail cam cards with gloves on and loaded them on the laptop at the table. 3:02 a.m., empty yard, fence line lit. 3:03 a.m., motion blur at frame left. 3:03:05, partial shoulder, fur matted, too close to lens to resolve. 3:03:07, a muzzle fills half the frame, nostrils flared, moisture reflecting IR. 3:03:09, one eye, not reflective now, just dark and fixed on the camera housing. 3:03:11, image tilts violently skyward. Next frame, static. The camera had been found 30 yards into the brush, strap torn. On the second cam, mounted higher, the footage was worse and somehow more convincing. It captured the back porch for 6 seconds at 3:14 a.m. Something stood just outside the mudroom door, mostly below frame because of the angle. But an arm reached up and touched the doorknob. Not swiping. Turning. Slow test to the right, then left, then a pause. The hand stayed there like it was listening through metal. At 3:14:19, the head rose into frame, just the top half, ears back, brow ridge heavy, and angled toward the exact pane where I had stood the previous night. It knew where I watched from. I called Len first. Voicemail? I texted photos anyway. I called Nate. He answered on second ring, voice rough with no sleep. You sound bad. I need someone out here tonight, just another set of eyes. Long pause. I can come after shift if my kid's fever breaks. No promises. I called Jules. She said she'd swing by on lunch to look at the fence, then called back 20 minutes later. Enforcement pullout on M72, mandatory coverage, couldn't get free till midnight if at all. Mara picked up before first ring finished. Tell me the truth. So I did, most of it. Not the part about the hand on the doorknob. Saying that out loud made it too real. She didn't joke this time. Leave the house, come here, bring Finch. I don't care if you sleep on my couch with your boots on. I can't just abandon a possible aggressive predator next to state land. You can if it's hunting you. I had no good answer. Holly called midday to confirm Eli's weekend time. Eli shouted in the background, Ask Dad if wolves can climb fences. Holly went quiet after that, then said carefully, You're not sleeping, I can hear it. If something's wrong, don't be stubborn because build it of pride. It's handled, I said automatically. It wasn't handled. By evening, more small things had shifted in the house in ways I could explain one by one and not at all together. The back hallway rug turned 90 degrees. A framed photo of Eli from when he was around 6, the one with the missing front tooth, face down on the mudroom bench, though I hadn't touched that shelf since moving in. The porch thermometer unscrewed and placed on the rail. Not damage. Rearrangement. Message behavior at 8:40 p.m. Len finally texted, "Stacked calls. Can't make pass till late. Keep doors locked." At 9 o'clock, I did another perimeter walk before full dark, sidearm on, headlamp off. Found fresh impressions near the truck's rear tire where the mud held shape. Elongated heel smear, toe marks forward, one print overlaid by something like knuckle marks. Beside it, my missing glove print in damp soil where it had been pressed flat, then removed. I put my hand in the impression. It matched my palm width almost exactly. That was when the shift happened in my head. Not from unknown animal problem to cryptid. I still refuse that word. It shifted from hazard management to predation pattern. It wasn't just near my property, it was interacting with me. I wrote in the notebook. Subject demonstrates object manipulation, route memory, threshold testing, and response to occupant behavior. Then, under that, smaller. I am likely primary target. The third night started wrong before dark. The forest went silent at 9:12 again. But this time the front ditch frogs cut out too, and even the highway hum from farther east felt damped, like sound was being held down by a hand. A pressure front sat low and heavy. No wind moved the birch crowns. I parked the truck nose out for a fast exit, keys clipped to my belt, go bag by the mudroom door. Sidearm loaded, spare mag on the shelf. Key fob for truck siren in right pocket, where my thumb could find it blind. Breaker panel access clear in case I needed to cycle floods fast. At 10:03, the barn sensor tripped and reset. Nothing visible. At 10:28, the rear flood tripped twice, no body and beam either time. At 10:45, I logged north breeze, then crossed it out. Air dead still. At 11:07, something struck the far fence once, hard enough to rattle dishes in the kitchen cabinet. Finch yelped and fled to the bathroom before I told him. I called County Dispatch non-emergency and requested a welfare drive-by flagged to prior incident. Dispatcher said units were tied up west on a rollover. Estimated 40-plus minutes, if anything freed. I gave my address twice because my voice shook on the numbers. At 12:41, the pacing began again, east to west, closer than previous nights, each step distinct through wet leaves. 30 seconds of movement, pause, 30 seconds. Pattern. I kept lights off inside except the mudroom bulb and watched through a narrow gap in the curtain. The eyes appeared at 1:17 as expected, then vanished immediately instead of holding position. A second later, the barnside sensor flashed, then front porch sensor, then rear again. It was circling faster than something that size should move. No, not faster. Smarter route. I moved to the kitchen and heard it at the back steps. A single nail clicked on wood, then silence. Then, from the opposite side of the house, the same chest-deep chuff, testing where I'd go. I grabbed the radio and got static with occasional clipped words from units miles away. Cell signal dropped to 1 bar, then none, then one again. I called Len. No answer. Called Nate. Straight to voicemail. Called Jules. Ringing, then dead. A heavy scrape sounded along the mudroom door, low to high, like claws being drawn up the panel in one slow stroke. The handle twitched once. Twice. I backed down the hall and shut Finch in the bathroom completely, wedging a laundry basket under the knob so he couldn't bolt if he panicked. He pressed against my knees, trembling so hard his ribs fluttered. "Stay," I said. My voice came out flat and unfamiliar. When I returned to the kitchen, the backyard was empty. Then the front motion light detonated white through the curtains. I turned in time to see a shadow pass across the frosted glass of the front door, too tall for the frame by a full head if fully upright, shoulders brushing both side lights. It didn't knock. It stood there for maybe 2 seconds, then moved off. I heard weight on the porch boards, then no weight, as if it had stepped sideways without descending the stairs. I couldn't stay in the center of the house, waiting for doors to decide whether they held. I needed options open: truck, mudroom, light control. I moved to the mudroom, unlocked it quietly, and cracked it 2 inches. Cold air poured in, carrying that musk so strong it stung my throat. The yard lights were on, fence line empty, truck visible past the lilac, 20 feet of open ground. Then something hit the barn wall with a hollow boom, and at that same instant the rear flood died. Not burned out. Off. The motion sensor still clicked. No light. I swore, shoved the door wider, and stepped onto the top porch step to get line of sight to the fixture and breaker run. That was the mistake it had been waiting for. From the dark between birches, 2 amber points snapped on at rail height, then rose as the body behind them unfolded. I saw shoulder first, then the long, wet muzzle, then one forelimb draped over the fence like it owned the property line. The hand flexed around cedar, and I heard the post crack at the edge. I thumbed the truck fob by reflex. My Ranger truck siren screamed alive across the yard, shrill and metallic, bouncing off the barn. The thing flinched but didn't retreat this time. It dropped lower, weight coiling into hind legs, eyes fixed on me. Behind me, mudroom door. To my left, open steps and 10 yards to truck through exposed yard. To my right, porch rail and dead corner against the house. The pacing stopped. Everything stopped. It held in that crouch across the fence, head slightly tilted, jaw opening just enough to show pale teeth in the flood spill. No wind, no frogs, no engines on the road. Just the siren and my own breathing, too loud, too fast. I had one hand on the sidearm, one thumb reaching for the breaker switch inside the door frame, and nowhere left to go except straight backward or straight through it.